All right, guys, so let's delve into our little history lesson first. We're going to go back as far back as the Roman Empire, and we're going to take a little look at how the Roman Empire had held control of Europe. Now, the Roman Empire fell, and this gave rise to feudalism. Why are we going so far back as the Roman Empire and feudalism in the 400 to the 1500s? Well, we want to understand the various events that gave rise to to the discipline of sociology. Because sociology was born in Europe, we want to understand the history of Europe and how Europe was shaped. Specifically, Europe's society was shaped by its very specific history. So, let's take a look at feudalism. Feudalism takes over Europe from the 400 to the 1500s. And in feudalism, the king owned all the land in the country and made the laws. He answered to the Pope. The king provided land to the nobles, who then provided it to the soldiers, that is, the knights. The land was sort of broken down between the nobility and the knights who worked for the nobility. At the bottom of this hierarchy were the peasants. The peasants were the poor class of this society, and they basically didn't own any of the land or much for themselves. They worked the land for sustenance, meaning they worked only to feed themselves. There was a lot of taxation during this time, and there was very little education. Education, that is, the ability to read and a little bit of learning, was reserved mostly for the nobility, the king, and the priests of the time. In feudalism, because of all these factors, we have a very high level of poverty. We have a lot of superstition, a lot of faith and belief in God that is unquestioning. So you could not question God, you could not question the beliefs or the teachings that were given to you, and you could not question the king who answered to the Pope. Remember, because he is answering to the Pope, this is the Catholic Church that holds the power essentially over the king and then by extension over the land. So there's a lot of belief in superstition and a lot of belief in God and religion as the answer to all things. So if anything bad happened to you, it was because God wanted it so. It was because you did something to anger God. It was because of some superstitious belief. And all answers were to God, the king, and by extension, the nobility. You will realize that in feudalism, there's not a lot of room for creative thinking or for science. Feudalism lasted many, many years. However, everything must come to an end, and so did feudalism. There's a few reasons why feudalism came to an end, including the Black Plague, which was also the bubonic plague distributed by rats at the time, and you can read up about the bubonic plague on your own. There was also the Hundred Years' War and the Peasants' Revolt, where in the Hundred Years' War, many, many lives were lost. This, along with the bubonic plague, led to a decline in the population in Europe. In addition to that, the Peasants' Revolt was the realization of peasants that they were worth more and they were demanding changes. Also, because there were less people, labor became a much more valuable commodity, and so peasants realized that they were not being adequately compensated. During this time, the nobility was also weakened, and there was the transition into a centralized government, such as what England has now. There was also the shift from the Catholic Church to the Anglican Church. And so we have here an image of King Henry VIII, who founded the Anglican Church. With the fall of feudalism, the Renaissance period begins. The Renaissance period is a time from the 1450s approximately to the 1600s. The Renaissance period is characterized by creativity and birth and encouragement of new ideas and new ways of thinking. You will notice that there is a lot of Renaissance art, and that is due to the burst of creativity. And you can go ahead and read a whole lot about the Renaissance period. It is a very rich period. You can read about it on your own as well, and I encourage you to do so. So, the Renaissance period was followed by the Age of Enlightenment. And just as what the Age of Enlightenment implies, it was a time of enlightenment and learning. During the Age of Enlightenment, we have many developments in science and invention, and a shift in thinking from superstitious beliefs and from religion towards science and logic. There are a variety of important inventors that you want to know about and important thinkers during this time. What you can see here is the timeline that is available to you in the lesson. So let's take a look at some of these important thinkers during the Age of Enlightenment. Here we have Sir Francis Bacon. Sir Francis Bacon is a very important figure of the Enlightenment period and also a major contributor to science because he developed the scientific method. The scientific method was further refined by Isaac Newton. So if you take a look down here, you will be able to see a little bit about Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton was a British mathematician and physicist that had some major contributions to science, such as the development of the three laws of motion for physics, the law of universal gravitation, the telescope. He created calculus, so you can blame him for your calculus headache. And also he refined the scientific method. These contributions to science led to the development of various inventions and lots of research during the time. So these are two major contributors to science and to understanding the physical world as we know it. The scientific method is continuously applied to the natural sciences as well as the social sciences more recently. In, or during, I should say, the Age of Enlightenment, we also have a major contributor known as John Locke. John Locke is an English philosopher and physician, and he is an empiricist. Empiricists are individuals who subscribe to a particular philosophy about how we acquire knowledge. It is very scientifically based on the idea that we must test our knowledge and rely on data. So, John Locke, he has various contributions specifically to political philosophy and social contract theory. His ideas about politics are what gives rise to the French Revolution in France and the American Revolution in the United States. These are also very important events in the history of sociology, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. During the Age of Enlightenment, because there's so much going on, we have a major invention, and that is the invention of the steam engine. The steam engine is a machine that makes many things possible, and here we have a picture of the steam engine. The steam engine allows for trains to be developed, allows for factories to grow, and so leads to the Industrial Revolution, where the Industrial Revolution is a movement from that very feudal way of life, that peasant way of life, to a reliance on machines. And of course, you can read more about the Industrial Revolution and watch the videos here in the timeline. All right, so the two important events, there's three overall important events, but the two overall important events are the French Revolution and the Industrial Revolution that lead to the development of sociology. So like I said, overall there are three important events, but we are looking at the French Revolution and the Industrial Revolution because these two events are what influenced Auguste Comte. So let's talk now about how sociology developed. Think about yourself. What are some of the things that anger you, frustrate you, or annoy you? Sociology developed in the same way, in that the father of sociology, Auguste Comte, saw a world around him that was frustrating and angering. So think about yourself. Do you believe the same thing as your grandparents? Do you do things the same as your grandparents? Sociology developed because someone, Auguste Comte, questioned reality and they were upset about what they were seeing. So Auguste Comte was upset about what he was seeing. And he did not think the same way as the people that came before him. So here we have a picture of Auguste Comte, the father of sociology, who was from the 1700s to the 1800s. So Auguste Comte grew up in the shadow of the French Revolution. Remember that John Locke comes with his ideas about politics and that we should leave the monarchy. And so the French Revolution happens and a new government is installed. With this new type of politics, Auguste Comte sees that the country is different. So in a nutshell, what happens in the French Revolution is that France had a monarchy, that is a king and a queen, and due to democracy and the ideas of John Locke that are based on democratic ideas, the French Revolution happens and the monarchy is removed. So a modern type government is established. Now, France also had a feudal society. And so this whole time during the Renaissance period and during the Age of Enlightenment, there is a monarchy. People are not used to the idea of a modern government with things like a president or a prime minister, which is what is established between England and France and the rest of Europe, actually. So during this time, people are adjusting to this new way of life, and Auguste Comte sees that. In addition to that, he sees the effects of the Industrial Revolution, with factories sprouting everywhere and reshaping the lives of the population. During the Industrial Revolution, we have lots of factories and we have people moving from the peasant land, essentially, from the countryside where the peasants would usually reside, and moving into the cities where the factories are sprouting. Here they are starting to work in these factories, and Comte is seeing there's so many changes happening, and it is changing the society on a whole, and not necessarily for the better. Comte wanted to understand everything that was unfolding around him. So, what was actually happening during the Industrial Revolution? Like I said, people moved from the countryside to the cities. There's little housing for them because the cities become overpopulated. And there's lots of pollution because of all of these factories and the residue that is being sent into the rivers. There's also lots of child labor during this time. It is convenient to have children work in these factories because they can do some of the things that the adults can't, like fit into the machines, fix parts of the machines where adults can't reach because they're too large or because their hands are too large. Essentially, the whole family is working in these factories, and they're working exhausting hours. So they're working something like 16 hours a day. So they're really only going home to sleep and then coming back to the factories. There's lots of overcrowding because, again, all of these people have moved into the cities. Due to all of this, there's lots of disease, there's lots of bad working conditions, the jobs are dangerous, it's too crowded, and it is overall an unhappy place to work and live in. And so this has effects on society. Society is becoming less traditional and is losing these norms and values that were held by the people before, during the feudal era, and the remnants of that feudal era during the monarchies. Because of all these changes, Comte wants to start to study society. And he believed that if you could study physics, biology, and chemistry using the scientific method, then why not study society? So he wants to start to apply the scientific method to the society. The scientific method, as you may know, is a series of steps that's used to collect and test out data. So you do some background research, you create a hypothesis, which is a guess about what your results will be. You experiment and test out your hypothesis, and then you draw conclusions. So Comte wanted to apply this technique to society. This way of thinking, of applying the scientific method to any type of knowledge you want to gather, is called positivism. And you can read much more about positivism in the resources that are provided to you. So, Comte believed that if you could study society and provide this knowledge to society about how society operates, you could build a better future for your society. And for someone in a very turbulent society as Comte, he was very hopeful about the future. So he dubs the new discipline of sociology, which has its origin in the Greek words socio, meaning society, and logos, meaning knowledge. So, Auguste Comte is credited as the father of sociology because he was the first one to apply the scientific method to the study of society. So I'm going to pause here, and you can go over the rest of the material to better acquaint yourself with some of the concepts and some of the people that are important to the history of sociology.